Hi, this is Dr. David Wright, and I just wanted to welcome you back to the Fresh Start with Dr. David podcast. As I announced during the last podcast, I'm going to start doing episodes more frequently. I'm going to start covering more topics that are currently in the news. I'm going to be relating those to health, mental health, wellness, self improvement, well being, those types of things. Anyway, talking about challenges that are presented to us, and specifically, or more specifically, solutions to some of the problems that seem to be growing in America. Problems related to health, wellness, diet, nutrition, weight, disease, um, viruses, pandemics, uh, inflation, even though it's not necessarily a uh, 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 podcast, but I will be talking about the concept of inflation and just kind of like the government's approach to it and things like that. And that's really relevant in terms of people living and managing money and making smarter decisions with their money and just kind of working around that. Um, but I'm going to be talking about a lot more topics, and I'll be also having special guests. So I'm really, really excited about this season. I did do a podcast yesterday. It hasn't been. It's been a minute since I've done two podcasts back to back. Uh, uh, Doing one day and doing one another the next day. But like I said, you're going to be hearing more frequent podcasts from me, and I'm going to be covering a lot more topics, and hopefully providing you with more solutions, more information, things like that, and then tell you other things that are going on with me and my practices and things like that. So anyway, I just wanted to welcome you back to the Fresh Start with Dr. David podcast. Like I said, I recorded an episode yesterday. It was kind of an update episode. It was about upcoming topics and upcoming podcasts. I talked about some of the podcasts that are upcoming in that podcast. I'm going to do a podcast upcoming on COVID-19 and the pandemic and everything that has to do with the pandemic, from the variants to the symptoms to risk factors to treatments to preventative things to proactive things. And, even though the purpose of the podcast is not really to go into politics, I'm also going to talk about kind of the evolution of this. It's happened before. This is not the first time we've had a pandemic like this. People tend to have short lived memories about things like this. We had another one where a scientist, a Dutch scientist, I believe, was fooling around with some things in a lab, and that's where we got avian flu from. There are a lot of things that are going on that we need to take notice of, and we need to do something about if we can. So I will be doing a big, pretty expansive episode on the COVID-19 pandemic. And actually, after I thought about it yesterday, I actually might turn that into two separate podcasts. One that's specifically just talking about the virus itself and the health and wellness and sickness and illness ramifications of it, and then the other one that's just talking about how it's affected us in our lives, socially, economically, and otherwise. So I'm probably going to break the COVID-19 pandemic episode into two separate episodes because I just think it's a lot to cover, which is kind of why I've kind of put it off. I'm also going to talk about the new virus from China. There's a new virus that's out from China. I think it was announced maybe 3 or 4 months ago. I'm going to do a full podcast episode about that. I'm going to talk about that and any related viruses that are out. I think that's really, really important. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about that in the COVID-19 pandemic podcast because I think it's relevant just from a social standpoint. If all these viruses are coming from the same place, what's going on? And we need to have some serious conversations about this and about the effects that it's had on people, financially and otherwise. If somebody else caused this virus and they did it knowing they could cause this, then they need to pay for it. They need to, we need to be reimbursed for this. And I'm not going to get into a lot into it right now, but I'll have more statistics about it. But when I do the podcast, you're going to see that it's cost trillions of dollars. It's cost the whole planet trillions of dollars. So to me, if some scientists, some researchers, some doctors, whatever, in China fooled around with stuff and created this virus, then why should the rest of the world have to pay for it? That's just not fair. And you know, so anyway, I will definitely talk about that concept. I'm also Going to do a podcast about boundaries, a podcast about time management, podcasts about setting priorities and decision making, a podcast about values, beliefs, and principles, a podcast about ADD and ADHD. We'll be talking about focus, concentration, attention, distractions. I think it's really, really relevant now because, I think a third of the population believe that they have ADHD or ADD or symptoms of ADHD. And a lot of them are unfortunately prescribed prescription stimulants that are addictive in nature and cause a bunch of other problems, including cardiovascular problems and also some mental health issues too. So I'll be doing a huge podcast about that because that's one of my specialties. I help a lot of people who want to work through their ADHD symptoms without medications, which, like I said, are addictive, generally speaking. So I'll be talking about that. I'm also going to do a huge podcast on anxiety and worry, and I'm going to talk about kind of my approaches to that. That's another specialty for my practice, is helping people with anxiety and worry without prescription medications. Usually it's treated with benzodiazepines, which carry a lot of risks like addiction and like falls and, cognitive things, cognitive decline. So I'll talk about that. I'm also going to do a podcast about PTSD and adjustment disorders. So I'll be talking about adjustment and trauma. I'll do a podcast on loss, grief, and bereavement. That's a huge thing. And I have a special service that I offer through my practice to help my clients who are dealing with loss, grief, and bereavement. It's a process. There are stages of grief that you have to work through. Usually, most people don't necessarily work through those in a linear fashion. They kind of bounce all over the place depending on a number of variables. And I have a specific process that I help to help people start working through the stages of grieving. And that's a session that you can schedule through my office. Clients who've done it so far have been miraculously surprised at how well that it's helped them in terms of starting to work through the stages of grief. So that's something I'll be doing a podcast on. And then I'll be doing a podcast on relationship rules and relationship dynamics. So that's really, really good. Everybody has a relationship with somebody. Most people have multiple relationships. And that podcast will be about relationship rules, relationship dynamics, and it'll also relate back to another podcast that I'm going to be doing, which is the podcast on boundaries. I think I mentioned that earlier, but it's hard to talk about relationships without talking about boundaries. If you've got relationships, you've got to have boundaries. And usually boundaries are used to help define relationships and prevent certain imbalances from occurring in relationships. So those are some of the podcasts that I'm going to be doing in the near future. So stay tuned. Like I said, I'll be doing them more oftenly. And I believe I'm going to be doing another podcast tomorrow, and I'll have a special guest. And that one is going to be about stability. So I'm really, really excited about that. And I think it'll be a good and knowledgeable podcast. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with today's topic. This topic is one that's been in the news a lot, and I was kind of, I wasn't sure how I wanted to approach it. So I thought about it for a couple of days. I also mentioned it in a previous podcast, but I'm going to go ahead and do this podcast. So this podcast today is about the Ohio train derailment, right? It's about what happened, what could have been prevented from happening, what was released into the air, into the water, what those things do, the response from the people who live there, the response from the CEO and the EPA, etc., and just kind of some general things that I'm going to mention about the environment and the air and the water and things like that. So anyway, this is kind of new territory. I've never done a podcast on this kind of issue before, but I think it's definitely relevant. And I'm going to try to not be a reporter about it. There's plenty, I guess, at least from what I was able to find out from the research that I did, there's plenty on this topic. I want to specifically talk about it from just kind of a social perspective, psychological perspective, and then a health and wellness perspective. And, especially as this relates to healthcare and wellness and how we treat our bodies and those types of things. So welcome back. I'm excited to have you here. As I've mentioned on the last podcast, the Fresh Start with Dr. David podcast is now everywhere, so you can find it anywhere that there are podcasts. Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Amazon Music, and it will soon be on Google Podcasts too. So it's everywhere that podcasts are found. So definitely subscribe to this podcast, share it with other people, rate it. I also have started a crowdfunding page for the podcast. And let me just tell you a little bit about that. The crowdfunding page is about raising money, not just for the podcast and what I'm trying to share with listeners, but it's also about a new 501c3, a nonprofit that I started that's aimed at helping teens, adolescents, and young adults to gain the life skills and the resiliency skills that they need so that they don't become the next generation of people who need psychiatric care. So it's a proactive, preventative nonprofit that I've started. I'm really excited about it. It's something that I started last year, and it's moving through the stages of becoming real. So you can go to my Facebook page and check that out. And there's more information about that. I also have 3 Facebook groups, and they are free to join. Absolutely 100% free. So the first 2 are private. They're called Fresh Start with Dr. David and New Balance with Dr. David. Those are private groups. And then the last one is called Grow, capital GROW, all caps. And Grow is a public group. So in these groups, I usually share a lot of positive affirmations, daily motivational quotes. Some of those are found in my book. Others are found elsewhere. Those are absolutely free. And if you join the Grow group on Facebook, then you can share them. The other 2 groups, they're private. You can't share attachments. I did not know that when I created those and made them private. And you can't, once you create a group on Facebook that's private, you can't change it to public. You can do the opposite. You can change a public group to private, but you can't change a private group to public. And I guess it makes sense why. Because if people join a group based off the notion that there was privacy, and then you change it and make it public, then I guess you'd have to make everybody re-agree. So they don't want to do that on Facebook. So anyway, I won't even go into that. But anyway, welcome back. And like I said, I would encourage you to join it, especially the Grow Facebook group, where you're going to get free positive affirmations that you can share with your circle, share with your friends, share with your relatives. It's free. It's uplifting. It helps you set the tone for each day. It's just something that's good for you. In terms of the crowdfunding page, I'll be giving you more information about that, but you can find that online in any of my groups and on my Facebook page. And if you look me up on Facebook, you should be able to find me, Dr. David Wright. I think my Facebook page is www.facebook.com/MLCOGA. I think that is, which is the initials for my first practice. So anyway, that's how you can find me, but you can just look me up. And you can find me in most places. You can also just visit my practices and locate me there and send me an email or whatever, or request an appointment or whatever, and then I can send you to the Facebook page if that's what you're looking for. And you can find the crowdfunding pages there too. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. So today I'm talking about the Ohio train derailment. I mentioned a little bit about it in the prior episode that I recorded yesterday, and I just want to say this kind of off the bat. I mentioned a little bit about what the residents had to say yesterday. The people who live there and are having to live through all of this and suffer through all of it. And then also kind of the response from the CEO that just kind of seemed not to be in touch with what they were saying. It seemed robotic. It didn't seem, very feeling. I don't know what his background is. It sounds like he's been with the company for a long time, but I just kind of got the feeling that he's like a company man, just saying what the company has told him to say or what he feels like he needs to be saying. But it didn't sound like he was in touch with them. It didn't sound like they're being listened to. It doesn't really sound like the governor's really listening to them very well or hearing them. It doesn't sound like a lot is going on, and that's just sad. I think a lot of it could be prevented. So I'm going to just tell you a little bit about what I found online when I looked it up. I also will preface this with the fact that I watched the CNN town hall the other night, where I saw all these things, the residents who were talking about it, the people who were affected, the people who live there, work there, drink the water there, breathe the air there, and the CEO. And I think there was a little brief announcement from the head of the EPA and things like that. But I'll just, if you don't know a little bit about it, I'm going to share a little bit. So, as a result of the derailment, the train derailment, 38 rail cars derailed and a fire ensued that damaged an additional 12 cars. Right? And there were 20 total hazardous material cars in the train, 11 of which derailed, right? And I did a little bit of research, and according to what I found, as it turns out, derailments are the most common type of train accident, and they are not uncommon. Federal U.S. data shows that there were 1,800 train derailments in 2021, which averages about 3 train derailments each and every day of the year. That makes sense. There's 365 days in a year. Multiply that times 3, and you get about 1,000, 1,100. So that makes sense. In this case, the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, or Train Safety Board, but I think it's Transportation. National Transportation Safety Board came out and said this: the overheated wheel bearing led to the Ohio train derailment. A wheel bearing on the train's 23rd car overheated to a dangerous degree, a new NTSB report says. An earlier warning may have helped to prevent the derailment, officials said. And then also read and saw some articles online, or the report online from the NTSB, which showed that actually that there were like a series of 3 or 4 warnings about that same bearing overheating. And it wasn't until the third one reached a certain point that they actually did something about it, that they started slowing down the train. So it wasn't a single warning that they got. It was like 3 or 4, a series of ones. And it's not until then that they started slowing the train down. I also found out that, there were some other things, but apparently this accident was 100% preventable, according to the NTSB. Right? So how many train derailments happened last year? So there were about 1,000 last year, about 1,049 specifically, and that's out of 535 million miles traveled. So yeah, that's not a lot of accidents if you consider how many miles. And it says here that the most common cause of train derailments is trains going too fast, right? Excessive speeds. And then the second cause was misaligned or broken rails, right? And in this case, it sounds like there was a bearing that got too hot. And specifically, that train derailment involved the release of 5 toxic, or mainly 5 toxic chemicals into the air, soil, or water surrounding the crash site. Vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, ethylene glycol, isobutylene, and ethyl hexyl acrylate. So none of those sound very friendly. And I think most people have heard of those chemicals, especially vinyl chloride. Maybe you haven't heard of butyl acrylate, but I know I've heard of seeing these chemicals. So I've heard of vinyl chloride. We had to study that in medical school, and we had to actually learn what diseases were associated with the most common toxins, right? And that was one of them that we had to learn. So I can't remember specifically. Maybe it was lymphoma or Hodgkin's lymphoma or something like that. But it was some kind of lymphoid disease. I remember being associated with that. But I'm certain that it's not just limited to that. Most of these chemicals cause all kinds of problems with all kinds of organs, from the liver to the lungs to the kidneys, the brain, and certainly the lymphoid tissues, right? The immune system. So vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, ethylene glycol, which I've definitely heard of, isobutylene, which I've definitely heard of, and then ethyl hexyl acrylate. So vinyl chloride, ethylene glycol, and isobutylene were the ones that I'd heard of before, right? So those are just some of the basics surrounding this, and I'm just going to go through it, and then finally I'm going to get to the chemicals and the risk factors and those kind of things. But like I said, in this specific accident, based on the National Transportation and Safety Board, it wasn't just one warning, it was like 3 or 4 warnings. So, I guess the obvious thing is, why didn't they start slowing down or stopping the train after the first warning? Why did it take the third one? I don't know. I mean, I guess that's the first kind of question that pops in my head is, why do you have a warning at the lower level if you're not going to do anything about it, if you're just going to ignore it? And then you've got another warning at a higher level. So apparently this bearing was reaching different temperatures, according to what I read. And then one warning was based off one temperature. The next warning was a slightly higher temperature, and the next warning was another higher temperature. So what's the point in having the first warning if you're not going to act on it? I guess that's the most obvious thing to me. Is there's no point in having the earlier warnings if you're just going to ignore them. The other thing that I mentioned in the previous podcast too is that this company that ran this train, Norfolk Southern Railroad, they have been fighting regulations for years regarding the safety of these trains and the number of people that should be on them, and I guess the sensors and the technology and everything. So all of these regulations that I think should be in place to protect communities as a proactive measure, because communities matter, which goes back to something else I'm going to do a podcast on, which is about values. And so, I guess the immediate obvious thing to me is, if these safety measures are meant to protect the people who live in the communities where these trains are flowing through, and you fight them or you don't want them, then you don't really value those people. Is that not obvious? You don't value them. You don't value their lives, their livelihood, their ability to have a safe environment, their ability to have a wilderness and outside and land and water and trails and things that they can enjoy and feel safe in, where their kids can, that's the obvious thing to me, is this company doesn't value, at least enough, these people's lives or their livelihoods. They just don't care. I could word it a different way, that the thing that just popped in my head, they just don't give a whatever bleep. But that's what it says to me. They just don't care. What they do care about is the things that they are involved in, like buying back stock and stockholder equity and stuff like that. I mean, and that's just sad. But here's the thing, and I mentioned this in the podcast from yesterday. That's where we are in this country right now, where for a lot of companies and a lot of people too, the only thing they value is money. Money, 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 money. And that's true in our healthcare system too. It's sad, because the biggest players in healthcare, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, and large healthcare organizations, that is all they care about, is money. Money, profit, revenues. That's it. And I think when you start there, if that's the goal in everything that you do and how you respond to things, it shouldn't be a surprise, the results that you get. So this accident was absolutely preventable, because there were 3 warnings, and this company has been fighting regulations for years that are meant to protect this community. And it's the job of the EPA to Environmental Protection Agency. It's their job to protect communities, right? We could say environment, but we're really talking about people's lives, their livelihood. And what are these people supposed to do now? To me, it doesn't matter if it's 5,000 people or if it's 5 million people. I mean, obviously, it's a greater effect at 5 million people. 5 million people lived in this area where it happened. But even if it's 5,000 people, those 5,000 people's lives matter. So, I guess that is the biggest thing that bothers me is, the reason why we have EPAs and things like that is because companies don't do a very good job of regulating themselves. Whether you're talking about police departments, or you're talking about physicians, or you're talking about attorneys or judges or anybody else, we just don't do a good job of regulating our own behavior. And that's why we have laws and rules and agencies and organizations. Now, obviously, the opposite side of that is over-regulation of things. And maybe there are some sectors, some areas in the United States that are over-regulated. I can think of a couple. just the top of my head, that are overregulated compared to other areas. But this one doesn't seem to be. And like I mentioned in yesterday's podcast, if you look at the difference between the rails, the train systems that I see in Asia, like these high speed, you know, technologically advanced systems, and here we are, the most powerful nation on earth, and we've got these rinky dink, old, rundown, rusted, uh, you know, out of commission infrastructure things, um, that do a disservice to us all and put communities at jeopardy. Um, and as an aside, and I thought about this after I recorded the podcast yesterday, but as an aside, you know, the other thing is look at all these near plane crashes and plane crashes. Actually, a couple weren't just near plane crashes; they actually happened. Um, and I mean, you know, and I guess that brings in the you know, the FAA and the air traffic controllers and the technology on the planes and all that kind of stuff. But like, why can we not get our act together? Why do we not care about enough about safety and preserving human life? I guess that's my bottom line. Because, you know, obviously, you know, I'm an MD. Um, you know, MDs take an oath to do no harm and to do good. The first thing that I look at is you know, health, wellness, well-being, things like that, and the importance of it. And if something's important, then you do things to protect it. If you don't do enough to protect it, that kind of says you don't value it enough. So why is it in a country that, you know, that we love, why can we not control what people do to protect and preserve the sanctity of human life? Right? Where are our values? Where are our beliefs? Where are our principles? I think they're misaligned. I think they're really, really misaligned. But anyway, let me get back a little bit to the chemicals. So, according to what I'm reading right here from NPR, more than 100,000 gallons of vinyl chloride were burned. 100,000 gallons, right? Specifically, it says here to prevent an uncontrolled explosion. The responders evacuated residents of the immediate area and performed a release and burn of 5 tank cars worth of the chemical, which amounted to 115,580 gallons of vinyl chloride. And you know, that's used for plastic for cars and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources reported that 3,500 fish had died following the derailment in nearby waterways. And I guess this is my big thing, where they were, you know, basically trying to say that these residents are okay to drink the water and everything's okay and the symptoms that they're reporting aren't happening and all that kind of stuff. Is this, you know, number one, I don't think these people are faking it at all. I think they're really sick. I think their symptoms are valid. And I think it's only in a world that we live in where somebody would try to suggest that they're not really, really sick. You know, especially with children with nosebleeds and stuff like that. You know, that's one big thing. But the other big thing is this. Like, last time I checked, fish weren't going to get a settlement check. You know, fish swimming in streams and ponds and reservoirs and stuff like that, they don't have a reason to fake it. So if fish are dead, and I don't care if it's from something that happened on the day that it happened, right? And that's, you know, according to what I read, some people were trying to suggest that that's just stuff on the surface. Who cares if it's just on the surface or not? You know, last time I checked, stuff didn't necessarily always just sit at the surface, right? So, you know, even if this company or somebody else tried to say that you know, that people were exaggerating or faking it, trying to get a settlement or something like that, I don't think the fish are faking it. I just, you know, or the wildlife. I haven't even looked about other wildlife, but, you know, what I read was about the fish. So they're not faking it. You know, something made that happen. And after there's a bunch of dead, and that even brings up another thing, issue. if there are dead fish floating in the water, is that good drinking water? I mean, I don't know. I don't know that our water purification systems are meant or designed for drinking when there's a bunch of dead animals in the water. Now, obviously, there's always dead animals in every body of water. There's something that's died there. But if the number of dead animals or fish in a body of water that's used at some point to make drinking water or used for something else, at some point there's too many dead things in the water for it to be easily cleaned. To me, that's obvious. So, and not only that, but if kids are saying this, why would you force them to drink the water? I mean, then it becomes not just a physical thing or a medical thing or a health thing. It becomes a psychological thing. Like who wants to drink some water that came from a place where there are all these dead fish floating around after a chemical explosion and a derailment of a train and release of chemicals? I mean, that's just from a psychological standpoint, that doesn't seem right, right? So, there's the health and wellness of the body, but then there's also the psychology of it, and that just doesn't seem like a good thing to do. If there's 3,500 fish dead in nearby creeks, right? And who knows if there's even more. But let's talk about a little bit more about the chemicals. Before I do that, though, I do want to mention this, and this is just something I haven't researched this myself, but I do think that I saw this on the news. But one of the things I noticed is that the director of the EPA kind of went after the CEO, and basically he said, I don't have a question, I have an order. And that's to, do what's right and things like that, which I totally get it. That he needs to do, the CEO of the company and the company's board of directors or whoever's in charge there needs to do right by these people, whatever that means. If that means buying their houses or taking care of all their medical bills or moving them or whatever, they need to do what's right because they were in the wrong. And this was preventable. So they should have full liability, period. And I think that's what they have insurance for. I don't know the limits, obviously, of their policies, but that's what insurance is for. So, that's one thing. But, and whether or not you agree with the tone of the EPA director and how he said that, is one thing. But here's something that somebody mentioned to me. Some people told me that the people from the federal EPA actually did not go there. So there's a lot of questions. I don't know if you've been keeping up with the latest issues about this now, but a lot of people are criticizing the water results and the other results that they're doing that are saying that this is safe, and they're like saying, well, no, there's some flaws in this. The water's really not safe. If you look at this, if you look at that, they're testing for stuff that's not even part of what was a contaminant or that derailed, things like that. And it made a lot of sense to me. A test is going to be negative if you're testing for something that's not supposed to be there. That's common sense. So, but somebody, I've heard several people say, and I think it was on the news, that federal people from the EPA haven't even gone there to investigate. And if that's the case, that kind of makes me wonder why. And the other thing about it too is this, and this is just kind of a medical principle. And I'll explain to you why I'm even bringing it up. Testing is all about a couple of different things, and I could do a full episode on testing. But testing, two or three of the important things about testing is, number one, what you're testing for, right? Number two, the accuracy of the test, right? So tests have sensitivity and specificity. They have accuracy and precision. So you have to look at all those factors for a test. How sensitive is the test? What will it pick up? What will it not? What is it not able to pick up? So how sensitive it is, how specific it is, and then you have to look at the last thing that's really, really important is the technique of the person doing the testing. And that's whether you're testing somebody's nose or nostrils for, or internal nasal aperture or whatever, anatomical area of the nose you're testing. If you're testing that for COVID, or if you're testing, the water or the soil for something, if you don't do the right test, if you don't test for the right things, if the test isn't accurate enough, or precise enough, or if it's not specific enough or sensitive enough, and the technique isn't right, you can't trust the results. So I don't blame these people from trusting the results. I wouldn't trust them either. But I just wanted to say that. And the thing that makes me really think about that is, a lot of times in psychiatry, especially now, in psychiatry and mental health, they'll drug test people. And they'll drug test and they'll go, oh, okay, yeah, Mr. Smith is on these medications, and, his drug testing came back negative. But what a lot of times they don't do is to test to see that Mr. Smith is actually taking his, aripiprazole, or if he's taking his Lexapro, or if he's taking his Prozac, or Wellbutrin, or whatever it is. So a lot of times when people say that they're taking something, they aren't. But nobody really ever tests for it, even in situations where they should be testing for it. It just doesn't happen. So there's a huge problem with testing. And even with COVID testing, I'll talk a little bit of, hopefully I'll remember to talk about this in the COVID-19 podcast episode that I do. But even with COVID-19, there was a report that came out that showed that one testing company, 96% of the tests that they did were really positive COVID tests. The company's test showed it was negative, which meant the test was completely worthless. And this company's, I can't think of it. I could look it up, but obviously they're under investigation now because they charge a lot of money for those tests, or they got reimbursed for those tests, But a test is worthless if you've got 100 people who take a test and all their results come back as the test was negative, like they don't have the disease or they don't have the virus or whatever, and then you do later investigations and research and find out that 96% of those people should have had a positive test, there's something wrong, because those people went about their lives and spread whatever they had, COVID, whatever else, to somebody else with the false belief that they were negative when they were positive. And that's a huge problem with COVID-19 testing. I hear people say that all the time. Oh, I tested negative. Great, but it doesn't mean a lot. That's if the person who performed the test did it right. Half the time, people don't even do the test right. The technique of the person, the tester, is bad, or the test is just faulty. And I know my mom was concerned about me because she knows I see clients every day. I do consulting work in forensic psychiatry, in addiction psychiatry and forensics. So I assist in forensic cases. I've been doing that for 15 years now, for a long time, and and I see a lot of things. And my mom, I guess she saw one of the TV ads or something. She ordered some tests. Maybe she ordered them from Amazon. I don't know. But I got these tests. It was called like iTest or something like that. Or iTest or eTest or something like that. It was some silly name. And, the funny thing about it is they sent me test B, but the instructions they sent me were for test A. So they sent me a mismatch between the testing instructions and the test. And I noticed that when I was trying to, do the test. I'm like, that doesn't add up. So a lot of these companies, they don't give a darn about whether your test is accurate or not, or what happens after that. They're just out to make money. And this company, I can't remember the name of the company. I've got it at home. I've saved some of those tests, but they don't care. They just don't care. It's all about the money. And that's where the issue of our values comes up. And if the value for everything associated with health and healthcare and wellness and environmental things is all about money, then you're always going to have bad results. So anyway, the test that I had, that my mom had sent, did not seem like accurate tests at all. And I was just like, this is crazy. I think it was made in China or somewhere, which is a whole other thing. That's another kind of anecdote that I noticed during this whole COVID pandemic is, like, if you look at where the masks come from, the gloves come from, all this kind of stuff, it all comes from the same place where the virus came from. And it's just like, okay, what are we doing here? Does that make sense? Can we not, power up America and put more people to work? But anyway, that's a whole different issue, and I'll talk about that in a later podcast. But let me just kind of get back to this, and then and then just kind of give some of my what I think are some solutions and some of my opinions. So vinyl chloride, that's the number one thing that I mentioned. Vinyl chloride is a colorless gas that is used in the production of polyvinyl chloride, a widely used plastic material. It is also used in the production of other polymers and in the manufacture of other chemicals. And it can cause liver damage, liver cancer. It can cause Raynaud syndrome, which is characterized by numbness and tingling in your fingers and toes. And prolonged exposure can damage your nervous system, leading to dizziness, confusion, and even unconsciousness. Right? It's an environmental pollutant. And it causes a lot of other things too, right? Besides just that. And as you may or may not know, your liver is the organ that basically whose job it is to detoxify and metabolize most of the things in your body, right? There's some other organs that help detoxify things, like your kidneys, but generally it's the job of the liver, and this causes damage to your liver, and it also causes liver cancer, among other things. Ethylene glycol monobutyl ether, EGBE, also known as butyl cellulosol. It's a chemical solvent that is used in a variety of industrial applications, including paint and varnish removers, degreasers, and printing inks. It can also be found in some household cleaning products, and I think that's where I've seen it before. Inhaling EGBE vapors can cause respiratory irritation, coughing, wheezing. It can also damage the skin. It can cause skin irritation, dermatitis. It's been linked to, in long-term exposure, it's been linked to liver and kidney damage, blood disorders, and it's also been linked to some other problems. Butyl acrylate is a chemical compound that belongs to a group of chemicals called acrylic esters. And I remember we had to study this in chemistry. There were ethers and there were esters, and it's I can't remember how many carbons have to be tied in a chain or whatever, but anyway, we had to study that. But it's a colorless liquid that is used in the production of various products such as adhesives, coatings, and textiles. Inhaling it can cause skin and eye irritation and can lead to respiratory problems. Prolonged exposure to high levels of butyl acrylate can cause more serious health effects such as headaches, dizziness, and nausea. It can also cause sensitization, which can lead to allergic reactions in some individuals. Ethyl hexyl acrylate is a clear colorless liquid that is used in the production of various products, including adhesives, coatings, and textiles. It can cause a similar kind of symptoms. And then isobutylene, also known as 2-methylpropene, is a colorless, flammable gas that belongs to a group of chemicals called olefins or alkenes. That's another group we have to study in chemistry, alkenes. And it's used in, rubber, and there's a bunch in lubricants and things like that, and also as a fuel additive in gasoline. It's also a refrigerant and a propellant, and it can cause irritation of the eyes and skin, and it can also cause headaches, dizziness, and drowsiness. The one thing I'm going to say about these chemicals, if you want to look those up, you can. There's obviously a lot more things about these chemicals that I didn't go through, but I'm just going to say a couple different things. Number one is this. If you have headaches, a headache is a warning system, right? A headache is a warning system from your brain that something's wrong. And it doesn't matter the reason why you're having the headache. It doesn't matter if the headache is because of your blood pressure, or if the headache is because you've inhaled something, or if the headache is because of a viral infection or whatever. A headache is a warning sign, right? It's a warning sign that your brain is under distress, right? It's a warning sign. And a lot of times when people have a stroke, it's preceded by a headache. Now, that doesn't mean that every time you have a headache, you're about to have a stroke. That's not what that means, and that's not what I'm implying. What I'm trying to say is a headache is a symptom that people really, really overlook easily. Oh, it's just a headache. And if it's a short headache and they're not chronic, not daily, then it may not be a big deal. It may be because of allergies in your sinuses, right? Your sinuses might be inflamed. That could lead to a headache. Or it could mean the blood vessels in your brain are inflamed, or some part of the brain is inflamed, right? So a headache could be benign, but there are certain things that you look for in medicine and healthcare related to headaches. When somebody says the worst headache of my life, that's a warning sign. If a headache lasts for a long time, right, hours, that's a warning sign. If a headache won't go away with over-the-counter NSAIDs, like Aleve or ibuprofen or Excedrin or things like that, then that's a warning sign. If a headache is so severe that you have to lie down, you can't hear sounds or smells or things like that, that's a warning sign. If your headache is followed by vomiting, things like that, those are warning signs. But the larger point is this: if you have a headache, regardless of the reason, pay attention to it, especially if it's chronic. If you start having chronic headaches, you need to go see a doctor. You need to see your family practitioner, you need to see a neurologist, you need to see somebody and get that fixed, because headaches are warning signs. And if you ignore warning signs from your body, whether it's your skin, your integument, which is your skin, or if it's your breathing or your brain, which, the warning sign there is headaches with some other things, lightheadedness, dizziness, things like that. That's really, really important. So don't just let that go. Address it. And then the other thing I'm going to mention is this. Those 5 chemicals that were mentioned, those are the signs that you get when they're just by themselves. When you mix them together, or when they all explode together, you get a whole bunch of other chemicals, right? The same thing is true with smoking. If you take a commercial cigarette has 4,500 chemicals in it, right? But when you burn it, you get a lot more chemicals than just the 4,000 chemicals, because when those chemicals mix together, or when they're burned, it produces different chemicals. When you burn something, it produces a different chemical, or a different set of chemicals or species of chemicals from what was there before it started burning. So, and who knows if they can even test for all that. So that's why the testing doesn't necessarily matter in this case. And I don't think these people should be satisfied that a test came back negative. It doesn't mean anything. Like I said, with the company, that 96% of their COVID tests came back negative when they were really positive. Who knows how many lives were lost because of that? Who could measure that? We'll never know. Or how many tests that company gave out to people, leading them to believe that they didn't have COVID when they actually did. So testing is not a foolproof thing, and these people should believe the symptoms, and they should believe that or have disbelief, or doubt regarding the test, because who knows if they're even testing for the right thing. When you start combining chemicals and then burning them off in a controlled release explosion, you don't end up with the same chemicals that you started with. You end up with different chemicals, and who knows if they're even testing for those, right? The way that I'm going to end this podcast is just kind of a general thing that I'm going to talk about the environment, right? And this is, this train derailment is a symbol of a bigger problem, right? Just like the whole Michigan water crisis. And I'm just going to say this statement. This is just my belief. Is if you believe that tainted water is just specifically contained in Michigan, then I've got some swampland I'd love to sell you in Florida. Water is tainted everywhere, and that's why people drink bottled water now. That's why. And who knows what's in the bottled water? That's a whole different discussion. I would recommend that you check out the first chapter of my book, The Nutrient Diet. It's all about water and water consumption. And the reason why that book starts with water is because water is the most important thing that you put in your body. And water is about 63, 64% of your body. So we're mostly water. We're walking around with water that's in little cells and tissues, but we're mostly water. And that's why, when we're in a car accident and things like that, we're so fragile and so many things happen. Football, injuries, you can name it. But that's why, because we're mostly water. We're just walking water, honestly. Encapsulated in cells and tissues and muscle and bones and things like that, but we're water. And that's why it's so important that the water is safe, because water is in every part of your body, and most of the tissues, a lot of the tissues in your body are delicate. The tissues in the brain are delicate. Your kidney, your renal tissues, they're delicate. The liver is a little bit more robust than some of the other organs, and so is the heart to some extent, but they both can be damaged by chemicals and things like that. So if 60 something percent of your body is water, then yeah, you should be really, really concerned about what kind of water you put in your body. And I wouldn't be drinking the water there if I were those residents either. But like I said, it's part of a bigger thing, and that's you know our water treatment systems. The water that's in different places is not safe to drink. I don't think it is. I think some people might actually remember a few years ago. I think it was since the pandemic started in 2020 that some company or some not company, some group or some terrorist group or somebody hacked into a water treatment facility or a town's water treatment system, their computer system or whatever, and changed the proportions of fluoride or something that was in the water and made it toxic. I mean, that's how delicate our infrastructure is. And that's the biggest point that I wanted to make today is, regulations and our infrastructure, our roads, our water, our railways, our train systems, our flight systems, all the different systems that we use and take for granted, those systems affect people. And in the case of this train accident, that affect a whole community. And it's about proactivity and what we value. We should be valuing human life more. We should be valuing communities more. We should be valuing our water more and our food more and our water supply and our water systems and our electrical grid and all this stuff, our roads. Because the worse the roads are, the more accidents there are going to be. So we need to take a step back and value more the things that we take for granted. And I really, really stand with the people of East Palestine. I was surprised when I heard it pronounced that way. They pronounced it East Palestine, not Palestine. I was surprised, but I think actually Palestine is I think it could go either way. Tomato, tomato, Palestine, Palestine. But anyway, they pronounced it Palestine, so I'm going to pronounce it the same way. But I totally stand with those people. I stand with the people of East Palestine. This is awful. This should not have happened to them. This company, Norfolk Southern, should have valued their lives, their livelihood, their health, their wellness, their well-being, the sanctity of their lives more, right? And they didn't, and they were negligent, and look what happened. Look what happened. So anyway, whether it's the water system or whether it's trains or whether it's planes, trains, automobiles, or your health and wellness, being proactive, being preventative is the most important thing. And like I said, what you do and what you fail to do, generally speaking, is a reflection of your values. And because companies value money more than anything else, the only thing we have left is the safeguards and protocols that we put in place. And so hopefully the EPA and all these other agencies do what they're supposed to do. Hopefully these tests get it right. I don't have a lot of faith in that, but I hope that they do. And hopefully the people of East Palestine and the surrounding communities are able to regain some sense of safety and environmental security and things like that. And I'll end with this. The other thing too is the mental health aspects of this. I mean, even if adults handle this really, really well, which, it's tough, but these kids are going to need some assistance. They're going to need some help. I wouldn't be surprised to hear that some of these kids end up with issues and phobias and anxieties and stuff associated with drinking water and things like that. It would not surprise me. And for good reason, because, people are telling them to drink water that's coming from places with, 4,000 dead fish and where there are chemicals that have been spilled. So anyway, hopefully the government does what it needs to do. Hopefully this company is forced to do what they should have done in the first place. And I totally pray for the people of this community. And I hope that other people like myself and like you are willing to do whatever you can to help these people return to normal. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to doing another podcast tomorrow on stability, which I'm excited about. I want to share some of the things that I think are really, really important in creating a life that's characterized by stability and to have stable relationships. So anyway, tune in tomorrow. Again, thanks so much for joining me for this podcast episode on the Ohio train derailment that occurred around or in East Palestine, Ohio. And do what you can, if you can, to help those people out, whatever that means or whatever you're able to do. So anyway, I will see you at the next podcast. Thanks so much for joining me again for the Fresh Start with Dr. David podcast. Bye-bye.